The Velkari had conquered 400 star systems before humanity even learned to split the atom, and they had grown so powerful that entire civilizations surrendered at the mere sight of their warships entering orbit. Supreme Hive Commander Zethvok stood at the center of his flagship's command chamber, his four segmented arms folded behind his back as holographic displays flickered around him like blue fire. His compound eyes scanned the tactical readouts with cold satisfaction, and the clicking sounds of his mandibles echoed through the silent bridge. The other officers dared not speak unless spoken to, for Zethvok had executed 3 commanders this cycle alone for minor failures. "Show me the human territories," he commanded, and his voice was like grinding stone. The hologram shifted to reveal a small cluster of stars near the edge of the galaxy's western spiral arm. A pitiful collection of 12 colony worlds surrounded a single yellow sun, and at the center sat the pale blue marble that the primitives called Earth. Zethvok felt his thorax vibrate with what his species recognized as amusement. "This is what the Council fears," he asked, and mockery dripped from every syllable. "These soft creatures who have barely crawled beyond their birth world." His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kethra, stepped forward with hesitation in her movements. "Supreme Commander, the High Council has received reports that concern them greatly. The humans have been expanding faster than predicted, and they have refused all attempts at diplomatic submission. 3 trade delegations have been turned away at their border." "Turned away," Zethvok repeated, and his mandibles clicked with dangerous rhythm. "Vermin do not turn away the Velkari, vermin bow or vermin burn." He had lived for 900 cycles, and in all that time, he had never encountered a species foolish enough to reject Velkari dominance. The galaxy operated on simple principles that even primitive minds should understand. The strong consumed the weak, and resistance only prolonged suffering. "Prepare the endless consumption fleet," he ordered. "We will remind these humans of their place in the natural order." Kethra's antennae twitched with what might have been concern. All 12,000 vessels, Supreme Commander, for a species with only 47 warships. "I do not wish to conquer them," Zethvok replied, and his eyes gleamed with cruel light. "I wish to erase them so completely that future species will whisper their name as a warning. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who forget their insignificance." 3 cycles later, the High Council granted an audience to a human diplomat, and Zethvok attended only because he wished to see these creatures up close before he destroyed them. The council chamber stretched vast and dark, filled with representatives from 100 conquered worlds who watched in terrified silence. The human walked in alone. She was small, barely reaching Zethvok's lower thorax, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held no fear. She wore simple clothing of black and white, and she carried no weapons that the scanners could detect. Her name, according to the records, was Ambassador Elena Vasquez. "You stand before the Velkari High Council," the ceremonial speaker announced. "You may present your petition for mercy." Elena Vasquez did not bow. She did not kneel. She simply stood there with her hands clasped behind her back and looked directly at Zethvok, as if she could see past his armored carapace into the cold intelligence beneath. "I am not here to petition for mercy," she said, and her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. "I am here to deliver a warning." Laughter erupted from the assembled Velkari, a harsh clicking sound like thousands of stones tumbling down a mountain. Even Zethvok allowed his mandibles to spread in what passed for a smile among his kind. The audacity of this tiny creature was almost admirable. "A warning," he repeated, stepping closer until he towered over her. And what warning could a human possibly deliver to the masters of 400 worlds? Elena Vasquez did not step back. She did not flinch. She simply looked up at him with those strange, soft eyes and spoke words that would echo through history. "Do not cross our frontier. This is not a threat, Supreme Commander. It is mercy. Turn your fleet around and forget that Earth exists, and you will live to conquer other stars. But if you cross the line we have drawn, if you enter our space with hostile intent, then I cannot promise you anything except darkness." The chamber fell silent for a long moment, and then the laughter returned, louder and crueler than before. Zethvok leaned down until his face was mere inches from hers, and he could smell the strange organic scent of human fear sweat even though her expression showed none. "Little creature," he whispered, and poison dripped from his words. "My fleet has burned civilizations that spanned 1,000 worlds. We have devoured species that were ancient when your ancestors were swimming in primordial soup. What could you possibly have that would make me hesitate?" Elena Vasquez smiled, a small, sad expression that Zethvok did not understand. "You will find out," she said, "but only once, because no one has ever crossed our frontier twice." She turned and walked away, and the Velkari let her go because killing a diplomat would be beneath their dignity. Zethvok watched her leave with something that might have been curiosity stirring in his ancient mind, but he dismissed it quickly. Humans were masters of bluffing. Their entire history was filled with examples of weak creatures pretending to be strong. 1 week later, the endless consumption fleet departed from the Velkari home system. 12,000 warships stretched across the void in perfect formation, their engines burning bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. Each vessel carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, and together they represented the greatest military force the galaxy had ever witnessed. Zethvok stood on his command bridge and watched the stars blur as they entered faster-than-light travel. In 6 standard cycles, they would reach Earth's frontier, and in 7, they would begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. "Supreme Commander," Kethra reported, "we are approaching the quantum beacon that marks the human territorial boundary." "Cross it," Zethvok commanded. The fleet surged forward, and 12,000 ships crossed the invisible line that humanity had drawn among the stars. Zethvok's sensors showed nothing unusual, just empty space and distant stars and a small blue planet waiting to burn. He felt no fear. He felt no doubt. He felt only the cold satisfaction of a predator closing in on helpless prey. The Velkari had crossed Earth's frontier, and Supreme Commander Zethvok was absolutely certain that nothing in the universe could stop them now. He was wrong. 72 hours passed after the endless consumption fleet crossed Earth's frontier, and across the galaxy, every species with long-range sensors watched and waited for the massacre to begin. The Velkari propaganda networks had been broadcasting constantly, showing live feeds of the massive Armada as it advanced toward the first human colony world. Commentators described in loving detail how the soft-skinned primitives would scream and burn, how their pitiful resistance would crumble like dry leaves in a firestorm. Conquered peoples were forced to watch as a reminder of their master's power. Then, at exactly 14 hours and 7 minutes Galactic Standard Time, every signal from the fleet stopped. There was no static, there was no distortion, there was no gradual fatting. One moment, 12,000 ships were transmitting perfectly clear signals across the void, and the next moment there was nothing but silence. Complete and absolute silence. On the Velkari homeworld, communication officers stared at their screens with growing confusion. They ran diagnostics and checked their equipment and sent query signals into the darkness, but nothing came back. The fleet had simply vanished from the universe as if it had never existed. "This is impossible," High Counselor Vrexthan declared, her voice trembling with disbelief. "An entire armada does not simply disappear. Check the sensors again." But the sensors showed nothing. No debris fields spinning through the void. No radiation signatures from explosions. No distress beacons screaming for help. The 12,000 ships and 16 million crew members had ceased to exist in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Across the galaxy, other species watched in stunned silence. The Morvathi collective, who had been conquered 3 centuries ago. gathered around their monitoring stations with trembling limbs. The crystalline assembly, who had surrendered without a fight to avoid destruction, hummed with frequencies that indicated shock and wonder. The free traders of Nexus Prime, who had remained neutral only because the Velkari found them useful, whispered among themselves with growing excitement. What had humanity done? How had they done it? And most importantly, could they do it again? The Velkari demanded answers. They sent priority communications to every species in their dominion, threatening terrible punishment for anyone who might be hiding information. But no one knew anything. The humans had possessed 47 small warships and a handful of colony worlds. They should have been nothing more than an afternoon's entertainment for the endless consumption fleet. 1 week after the disappearance, the Velkari High Council convened an emergency session and made a decision born of desperation and wounded pride. They would send a scout drone across the frontier, a simple unmanned probe equipped with the best sensors their technology could produce. It would find the truth. The drone was launched from the nearest Velkari outpost, and millions watched its telemetry as it approached the invisible line that marked human space. Its cameras showed nothing but stars and empty vacuum. Its sensors detected no weapons, no defenses, no hidden armadas lying in wait. The drone crossed the frontier at exactly 9 hours and 33 minutes Galactic Standard Time. The signal cut off instantly. No data burst, no final transmission, no indication of what had destroyed it. The drone simply ceased to be, just like the 12,000 warships before it. Panic began to spread through the Velkari Dominion. For the first time in their 9,000-year history of conquest, the masters of 400 worlds faced something they could not understand or overcome. Their subjects sensed weakness, and rebellions began erupting on a dozen planets within the first month. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued as if nothing had happened. Ships departed and arrived at orbital stations. Farmers tended their fields beneath blue skies. Children attended schools and learned mathematics and history and art. News broadcasts mentioned the disappearance of the Velkari fleet only briefly, treating it as a minor curiosity rather than the galaxy-shaking event it truly was. A delegation of alien journalists managed to reach Earth's outer colonies, desperate for answers. They were greeted by polite human officials who offered them comfortable quarters and excellent food, but absolutely no information. "We have no comment on internal security matters," said a smiling bureaucrat named Thompson. "Would you like more coffee? It is a traditional human beverage that many species find quite pleasant." 16 million Velkari are missing, one journalist shouted. 12,000 warships have vanished. How can you have no comment? Thompson's smile never wavered. The Velkari entered our space with hostile intent despite our explicit warnings. What happened to them after that is not something we discuss with the press. Now, about that coffee. The journalists left Earth with nothing but confusion and fear, and their reports only added to the mystery. The humans were not celebrating. They were not boasting. They were not displaying captured ships or parading prisoners. They simply went about their lives as if making an entire armada disappear was a perfectly ordinary thing that did not deserve special attention. 3 months after the disappearance, Ambassador Elena Vasquez agreed to address an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives from every major species packed the chamber, their varied forms creating a chaotic tapestry of scales and fur and crystalline structures. The Velkari delegation sat in their elevated section, their compound eyes burning with hatred. Elena Vasquez walked to the central podium with the same calm confidence she had shown in the Velkari Council chamber. She looked out at the assembled representatives and waited for silence to fall. "You want to know what happened to the endless consumption fleet," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "You want to know how 47 warships defeated 12,000. You want to understand what power humanity possesses that could accomplish such a thing." She paused, and when she spoke again, Her voice was cold. "We warned them." Supreme Commander Zethvok stood before me, and I told him exactly what would happen if he crossed our frontier. I told him that no one has ever crossed twice. He laughed at me. His entire council laughed at me. They were so certain of their power, so convinced of their superiority, that they could not imagine any consequence for their arrogance. Her eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gazes of species who had trembled before the Velkari for millennia. "Now you know the truth of that warning. The Velkari crossed our frontier once and they have not been seen since. I suggest, very strongly, that no one else makes the same mistake." The Velkari representative surged to her feet. "This is an act of war. You have murdered 16 million of our citizens. We demand justice." Elena Vasquez turned to face her with an expression that held no anger, no fear, only a strange and terrible sadness. "You sent those citizens to burn our worlds and slaughter our children," she replied. "We did not start this war, we ended it. Be grateful that we chose to end it at our border rather than at yours." She walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving behind a galaxy that would never see humanity the same way again. The primitives from the small blue world had done the impossible, and no one, not even the humans themselves, was saying how. 6 months after the endless consumption fleet vanished, the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. The Velkari Dominion was crumbling. Without their primary military force, the conquered world sensed weakness like blood in the water. Rebellions erupted on 30 planets in the first month, then 50, then 100. Species that had lived under the crushing heel of Velkari rule for centuries finally rose up with weapons they had hidden for generations. The masters of 400 worlds found themselves fighting desperately on every front. Their remaining forces stretched too thin to maintain control. But while the Velkari burned, something else was spreading through the galaxy, something perhaps even more dangerous than war. Fear of humanity. Every major power began reassessing their relationship with the small blue world and its soft-skinned inhabitants. The Morvathi Collective, freshly freed from Velkari control, sent ambassadors bearing gifts and treaties of eternal friendship. The Crystalline Assembly voted unanimously to recognize human territorial claims extending 3 times further than before. Even the proud warrior clans of the Nexar hegemony, who had never feared anyone, quietly withdrew their military patrols from regions anywhere near human space. No one knew what humanity had done, but everyone knew they did not want it done to them. Theories spread through the galactic networks like wildfire. Scientists and military strategists and conspiracy theorists all proposed explanations, each more terrifying than the last. Some claimed humanity had developed weaponized black holes, gravitational singularities that could swallow entire fleets in an instant. Others suggested dimensional displacement technology that could shunt matter into parallel realities from which there was no return. A popular theory among the religious species was that humanity had somehow made contact with the beings they called gods and had convinced them to intervene. The most frightening theory of all was that humanity possessed a reality-altering virus, something that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in a localized area, erasing anything within from existence itself. If this was true, then humanity could theoretically erase entire star systems at will. Earth's government responded to all inquiries with the same polite refusal. "Our defensive measures are classified. We do not discuss matters of planetary security with foreign powers. We hope you will respect our privacy as we respect yours." The politeness made it worse. A species that boasted and threatened could be understood. A species that simply smiled and said nothing was utterly terrifying. 7 months after the disappearance, a delegation of 7 species arrived at Earth's orbital station. They represented the most powerful remaining civilizations in the galaxy, and they came not with threats but with desperate pleas. "We must understand, The Morvathi ambassador begged. "Not to steal your secrets or use them against you, but the uncertainty is destroying us. Wars are breaking out everywhere as species scramble to fill the power vacuum. If we knew what you were capable of, we could help maintain stability." The human representative, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, listened to their concerns with genuine sympathy before shaking her head. "I am sorry," she said, "truly sorry, but what we have is not something we can share. It is not something we fully understand ourselves. All I can tell you is that Earth is protected, and anyone who threatens us will face consequences they cannot imagine. Use that knowledge however you think best." The delegation left empty-handed, and the mystery remained. But deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a facility that appeared on no map and existed in no record, a small group of humans knew the truth. General Marcus Webb was 73 years old, and he had spent 40 of those years guarding secrets that would have driven lesser minds to madness. His hair was white, his face was lined with decades of stress, and his eyes held shadows that never quite faded. He walked through corridors carved from solid rock, passing security checkpoints that scanned his DNA and his retinal patterns and the unique electromagnetic signature of his brain. At the heart of the facility was a room that hummed with power drawn from sources that human science still could not fully explain. Massive screens covered every wall, displaying data streams in languages that had been dead for millions of years before Earth's sun had even formed. In the center of the room stood a device that looked like a twisted sculpture of black metal and crystalline light, the artifact that had changed everything. They had found it on Mars 200 years ago, buried beneath the red soil in a chamber that predated the solar system itself. The species that had built it was long extinct, victims of something they had awakened in the dark spaces between realities. But they had left behind their technology and their warnings, hoping that whoever found them would be wise enough to heed their mistakes. Humanity had not been wise. Humanity had been desperate. General Webb approached the primary display screen and entered his authorization code. The screen flickered to life, showing a map of a space that did not exist in any dimension humans could normally perceive. Points of red light clustered in the darkness, thousands upon thousands of them, each one representing a Velkari life sign. They were still there, still alive, still aware. "Status report," Webb commanded. A young technician looked up from her console with an expression that mixed professional competence with deep unease. "No change, General. All subjects remain in stable stasis within the quiet. Vital signs are constant. Neural activity suggests continued consciousness." Webb nodded slowly, and his old hands gripped the railing before him. The weight of what they had done pressed against his chest like a physical burden. "They are not dead," he whispered to himself. 16 million souls and not one of them is dead. That is the worst part. The quiet, that was what the original builders had called it. A dimension that existed parallel to normal space, separated by barriers so thin that they might as well not exist. The entities that lived there were ancient beyond measure, patient beyond understanding, and curious beyond any safety. They did not experience time the way normal beings did. To them, a million years was an afternoon nap. And humanity had gotten their attention. The artifact on Mars was a doorway, a stable bridge between realities that the long-dead builders had created in their arrogance. They had thought they could study the entities of the quiet safely, learn from them, perhaps even control them. They had been wrong, and their entire civilization had been harvested as a result. Humanity had been more careful. They had not tried to control the entities, they had simply asked for help, and the entities had listened. General Webb turned away from the screen and walked toward the exit. Behind him, the red lights continued to pulse in the darkness. 12,000 ships and 16 million crew members, frozen in a dimension where time had no meaning, studied by intelligences that would never grow bored. The Velkari had crossed Earth's frontier, and now they would exist forever in the quiet, conscious but unable to move, alive but unable to die. Webb had nightmares about it every single night. But he would do it again in a heartbeat to protect his world, and that knowledge was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. The classified recordings were stored in a vault that required 3 separate keys held by 3 separate people who did not know each other's identities. General Webb had watched them exactly once, 40 years ago, and they still haunted his dreams every night. Now, standing in the deepest chamber of the Pacific facility, he prepared to share them with his successor. Colonel Sarah Chen was 42 years old, brilliant beyond measure, and absolutely terrified. She had been briefed on the existence of the quiet 3 days ago, and she had not slept since. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the viewing device from Webb, and her eyes held questions that words could not properly express. "What you are about to see is the complete record of first contact," Webb said. "It happened 173 years ago in a research station on Phobos. 6 scientists made contact with entities from the quiet. Only one survived with her sanity intact, and she spent the rest of her life building the systems that protect us today." The recording began. It showed a sterile white room filled with equipment that looked ancient by modern standards. 6 people in laboratory coats stood around the artifact, the same twisted sculpture of black metal and crystal that now rested in the Pacific facility. They were running tests, measuring energy outputs, trying to understand the technology that had waited beneath Mars for billions of years. Then the artifact activated. Light that was not light poured from its crystalline structures. The air itself seemed to thicken and twist. The scientists stumbled backward, their faces showing confusion and fear as reality bent around them. And then the entities appeared. Colonel Chen gasped and nearly dropped the viewing device. The things that emerged from the artifact defied description. They had no fixed shape, no consistent form. They were geometry made wrong, angles that could not exist in normal space, shadows that cast light and light that created darkness. Looking at them felt like staring into infinity while infinity stared back. The scientists screamed. 3 of them collapsed immediately, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. 2 more ran for the door but never reached it. Their bodies simply stopped moving, frozen in mid-step like insects trapped in amber. Only one scientist remained standing, a woman named Dr. Helena Vasquez, great-grandmother of the ambassador who would one day warn the Velkari. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply stood her ground and looked directly at the impossible things before her. "We did not call you," she said, her voice steady despite the madness swirling around her. "But you answered anyway. Why?" The entities did not speak with sound. They spoke directly into her mind, and the recording captured her reactions as alien concepts poured through her consciousness. "They are curious," Helena said, translating as best she could. "They have been watching us for a long time, since before we were human, since before we were anything. They find us interesting because we are so small and yet we keep trying to understand things that are bigger than us." She listened to more of their impossible communication, and her face grew pale. "They want to know why we woke them up. They want to know what we want." The recording showed Helena Vasquez making a decision that would shape the future of humanity. She looked at her frozen colleagues, at the chaos the entities had brought simply by existing in normal space, and she understood that humanity could never control these things. They could never study them safely. They could never pretend to be equals. But perhaps, just perhaps, they could make a deal. "We are small," she said. "We know this. We are young and weak, and there are others who wish to destroy us. We cannot fight them alone. We need protection." The entities seemed to consider this. Reality flickered around them like a damaged video feed. Then they responded, and Helena's eyes went wide. "They say yes," she whispered. "They say they will protect us, but they want something in return." "What?" her own recorded voice asked itself. "What could we possibly give you?" The answer made her laugh, a sound that bordered on hysteria. They want to watch. They want to observe us, study us, see what we do and how we grow. They find us entertaining. We are like pets or maybe zoo animals. They do not wish to harm us any more than we would wish to harm an interesting insect, but they want to keep watching. And so the agreement was made. The entities from the quiet would protect Earth from any threat that crossed their frontier with hostile intent. In exchange, humanity would allow them to observe, to watch through the thin barriers between dimensions, to study human behavior and human growth and human strange little lives. The recording ended there, but General Webb had more to tell. The protection works through a mechanism we still do not fully understand, he explained to Colonel Chen. When something crosses our frontier with hostile intent, genuine intent to harm, not just curiosity or accident, the entities take notice. They reach through from the quiet and they simply remove the threat, not destroy it, remove it. They pull it into their dimension where physics works differently, where time barely exists, where consciousness continues forever without the mercy of death. Chen's face was gray. The Valkyrie fleet is still there, Webb confirmed. All 16 million of them, frozen in dimensional stasis, unable to move, unable to die, but fully aware of their situation. The entities are studying them now, examining their biology and their technology and their thoughts. They will continue studying them for eternity, because in the quiet, there is no such thing as an ending. That is monstrous, Chen whispered. Yes, Webb agreed without hesitation. It is absolutely monstrous. We have condemned millions of souls to an existence that makes death look like a kindness. But we did it to save billions of human lives, and I would do it again without a moment's regret. He turned to face her directly, and his old eyes held a weight that threatened to crush her. This is the truth of humanity's great weapon, Colonel. We did not build some clever technology. We did not discover some secret science. We simply opened a door that should have remained closed, and we pointed at our enemies and said, those ones to things that exist beyond our understanding. We are not powerful. We are simply willing to make bargains that other species would consider unthinkable. Chen stood in silence for a long moment, processing the horror of what she had learned. Does anyone else know? She finally asked. No, Webb replied. And they never can. The galaxy believes we have some incredible weapon, and that belief keeps us safe. If they knew the truth, that our protection depends on the attention of entities we cannot control, whose motives we do not understand, who could withdraw their help at any moment for reasons beyond our comprehension, that fear would disappear, and so would we. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Welcome to the most important job in human history, Colonel. Try not to let it destroy you. 1 year after the disappearance of the endless consumption fleet, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new order. The Valkyrie Dominion had collapsed entirely, its 400 conquered worlds breaking free in a cascade of revolutions that left the former masters cowering on their homeworld. Other empires had rushed to fill the power vacuum, but every expansion stopped cold at the borders of human space. No one, absolutely no one, was willing to test whether humanity's impossible weapon could strike twice. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had become the most famous human in galactic history. Her face appeared on news broadcasts across 1,000 worlds, always accompanied by the same message. She warned them, and they did not listen. Species that had never heard of Earth now taught their children about the small blue world where soft creatures had done the impossible. But Elena Vasquez was not celebrating. She stood on the balcony of her apartment in Geneva, looking up at stars that seemed somehow colder than before. The weight of her knowledge pressed against her like a physical burden, and she wondered, not for the first time, whether humanity had truly won anything at all. Her grandmother's journals were spread across the desk behind her, filled with warnings that grew more urgent with each passing year. Helena Vasquez had understood the entities better than anyone, and her final writings were not triumphant. They are growing more curious, she had written. Their questions are becoming more frequent, their requests more specific. They want to know about our biology, our psychology, our social structures. They want samples, tissue, blood, neural scans. I give them what I can because I dare not refuse, but I fear what this curiosity might become. Alina closed her eyes and remembered the secure transmission she had received from the Pacific facility just 3 days ago. General Webb's successor, Colonel Chen, had reported that the entities were asking for something new. They wanted access to human dreams. Not metaphorical access, literal access. They wished to observe human consciousness during sleep, to study the strange images and emotions that flickered through sleeping minds. They had never shown interest in such things before, and the scientists at the facility could not determine why they were interested now. Chen had asked what she should do, and Alina had given the only answer possible. Give them what they want. What choice did humanity have? The entities were not evil. They were simply beyond human understanding, and their protection was the only thing standing between Earth and annihilation. But the requests were growing. The observations were intensifying, and Alina could not shake the feeling that humanity's guardians were becoming something else entirely. 10,000 light-years away, in a dimension that existed parallel to normal space, Supreme Commander Zethvok drifted in infinite darkness. He could not move. His body was frozen in the moment of transition, the instant when his flagship had been pulled from normal space into this nightmare realm. His compound eyes were locked open, staring into shadows that seemed to breathe and pulse with terrible life. His mandibles were frozen mid-click, and the sound he had been making when he vanished still echoed in his mind, repeating forever. Around him, his entire fleet floated in perfect preservation. 12,000 warships hung motionless in the void, their crews visible through viewports as frozen statues of terror and confusion. 16 million Velkari warriors, officers, technicians, and servants, all of them conscious, all of them aware, none of them able to do anything but exist. Time did not pass here, not in any way that mattered. Zethvok had no way to measure how long he had been trapped, but it felt like centuries. It felt like eternities. Every moment stretched into infinity, and infinity collapsed back into a single moment, and through it all he remained aware of his helplessness. And he was not alone. The entities that had taken him moved through the darkness like living shadows. They had no faces, no forms that his mind could properly process, but he could feel them studying him. They poked at his thoughts and examined his memories and dissected his consciousness with the clinical interest of scientists studying a specimen. They were not cruel. Cruelty required intent, and these things seemed to have no intent beyond pure curiosity. They simply wanted to understand, and they had literally forever to do so. Sometimes, in moments that lasted either seconds or years, Zethvok could sense other minds in the darkness. Millions of his people, all trapped in the same frozen awareness, all being studied by the same impossible entities. Their terror echoed through the void like a choir of eternal screams. And sometimes he could sense something else. Far away, in a direction that had no meaning in this place, there was light, warmth, life. The universe he had come from still existed, still spun on without him, still held creatures who could move and speak and die. He could feel it like a distant memory, and the longing for it was worse than any torture. But worse than the longing was the knowledge. The entities were not satisfied with what they had. The Velkari were interesting, yes, but they were already known, already studied, already cataloged and examined and understood. The entities wanted something new. And their attention was turning toward the universe beyond their dark domain. Zethvok could feel it, a growing hunger that had nothing to do with malice and everything to do with curiosity. The humans had opened a door and invited these things to look through, and now they were wondering what else might be on the other side. What other species might be interesting? What other consciousnesses might be worth collecting? The humans thought they had made allies. They thought they had found protectors, but Zethvok understood predators, and he knew that the most dangerous ones were those who did not even realize they were hunting. In the Pacific facility, Colonel Sarah Chen stared at a new report with growing dread. The entities had made another request, this time for information about other intelligent species in the galaxy. Not threats to humanity, just species in general. They wanted to know what else was out there. She thought about refusing, but the thought vanished as quickly as it came. You did not refuse beings who existed beyond physics. You did not negotiate with intelligences that perceived time as optional. You simply gave them what they wanted and prayed they stayed friendly. On her balcony in Geneva, Ambassador Elena Vasquez looked up at the stars and whispered words her great-grandmother had written a century and a half ago. We did not win a war, we attracted attention, and now we must hope that the attention never turns from curiosity to appetite. The galaxy believed humanity was powerful. The galaxy believed humanity was safe. The galaxy believed that the small blue world and its soft-skinned inhabitant had somehow become the most dangerous species in existence. But Alina knew the truth. Humanity had not become predators. They had simply become the pets of something far worse. And pets existed only as long as they remained entertaining. Somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, ancient intelligences turned their attention toward a universe full of life, and they began to wonder what other interesting things might be waiting to be collected. The Velkari had crossed Earth's frontier once, and their armada had vanished forever. But that was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning.